Hey there, this is Alec Soth in my library in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I recently recorded a kind of rambling talk on the relationship of pictures and words, and I wanted to do a separate talk, a little bit more focused on one specific book, one of the all-time great books in combining pictures and words, and that is The Sweetflypaper of Life by Langston Hughes and Roy DeCarava. But kind of like that last video, I actually want to start by first talking about a children's book. And the book I wanted to mention was this one, Toby. Because I think it speaks to part of the success of Sweetflypaper. So Toby was published in 1939, and the author was a woman named Stella Gentry Sharp, and Sharp was a white school teacher. And the story she tells is that she was in the neighborhood, and a black child came up to her and said, "Why aren't there any children's books that show black children?" And so she decided to publish one. And her original idea was to write this story about a boy named Toby and his family, and have someone illustrate it. And she took snapshots to make the illustrations from. But there was a feeling that the snapshots weren't specific enough and wouldn't specifically address the world of black children. And so she hired a photographer, Charles Farrell, and he made the pictures. The funny thing about it is that it took years for this to happen. So the children that she had originally picked out to be in the pictures had gotten too old, so they had to go cast new people and so forth. It's a really lovely book, and of course problematic in some ways, but at the same time, and in the community in which she showed, this book was revered for showing a little slice of their life. It's sort of too good to be true, of course, but something tender about it. One funny story is that the publisher was publishing this with the idea of showing what black people in the South look like, and so they wrote in a scene with cotton picking. In fact, in this part of North Carolina, there's no cotton picking, so these kids are performing for the camera. There is this question of who's the book for, and it does appear that some black school children had access to it, and so that's good. But of course, it's produced by a white writer and a white publisher, and with all of that behind it. So good intentions, but is it an authentic document? It's hard to say. But it, for what it's worth, the book did very well, and it's an important book in children's literature. What also came to mind when thinking about Sweetflypaper of Life is this book, 12 Million Black Voices. So this was published in 1941, and the writer is Richard Wright, and all of the photographs are by FSA photographers. And once again, the FSA photographers are all white. However, the book has Wright's very powerful voice. I mean, this title is quite strong, and so are the words of Richard Wright. The photographs, there are a lot of striking photographs, but it's a hodgepodge from different photographers. So this photograph was made by Dorothea Lange, and it's later been revealed that this is in fact a white man holding this. It's when you see other pictures in the contact sheets, it's not a black man. So the photographs are kind of illustrational. Another thing to note here is who this book is addressed to. So he starts, each day when you see us black folk upon the dusty land of the farms or upon the hard pavement of the city streets, you usually take us for granted and think you know us. But our history is far stranger than you suspect, and we are not what we seem. So Wright is directly addressing a white audience. This book, which cost $350 in 1941, which is not cheap, was for white people. And I think Wright's text is pretty great. It's very strong. But the photographs are okay. But sometimes they just feel like filler to me. A real exception is here. I mean, so Wright has this. I'm not going to read it, but it has this little rhyme, and it's it's very tough. And then we flip the page, and there's a picture of a lynching. So this is a news photograph. This is not an FSA photograph. But I do think that, and here the law is white. I mean, this is strong political work. And I actually think it functions better when the photographs have that kind of political charge to them rather than this more typical documentary feeling of FSA photographers. It's a valuable book, but kind of like Toby, it's this mismatch of white and black. And that's what brings us to Sweetflypaper of Life, because here you have a black photographer and a black writer putting something together. So at the time this was published, which was 1955, Langston Hughes was already a real force in the literary world. Roy DeCarava was 33 years old, and he had a Guggenheim, and where he had photographed in Harlem. And then he took those pictures around to different publishers, and no one was interested. And then he took them to Langston Hughes, and Hughes responded. And he wrote this book in response to those photographs. Now the writing, interestingly, is fiction. So it says here the text of this book is entirely fictional. And that's kind of jarring because Hughes writes with such specificity. I mean, we have, right here on the cover, Sister Bradley said, so we imagine who Sister Bradley is, and we have all this cast of characters. And, it says, and then there's Rodney. Now you take Rodney, and so here's Rodney. Now this is a real person whose name is not Rodney, presumably. And it's quirky, but it works. There's kind of not, there's no book like this for me in terms of this relationship between text and image. But it has a light touch to it, and his writing is just very jubilant and bouncy. and the pictures are energetic. And I think as much as anything, the success of this book is its scale. So, this is a pocketbook. This is quite small. It costs $1. Uh, so it was very much for a black audience, as well as a white audience. It was for whomever, and it was affordable, and it's entertaining, and it has lots of sweetness without being overly sentimental. Roy DeCarava makes a lot of somber pictures normally, like this one and one of his famous ones. But then you have all of these other moments and smiling and laughing and dancing. And so it feels like a really intimate portrayal of this life in Harlem. And I really feel like this is something that those FSA photographers couldn't do. You had moments of it with them, but it's DeCarava's, access and his own background that makes this book possible. And it's just a total delight. And while, okay, I don't always love, sort of fiction and photographs together, because of the scale of the book and sort of the light touch and the design, it does work for me. Of course, I wish that DeCarava at age 33 could have produced a monograph as well. But fortunately, we have his pictures that live on. I just quickly want to talk about DeCarava's books. So in my newsletter, which I encourage you to sign up for, I talked at great length about this book, which is one of my all-time favorite books, even though it's not an authored book as such. It's an exhibition catalog, but it presents DeCarava's pictures with just a lot of white space, a lot of quiet, which I think benefits his eye, which is so quiet. And after I wrote that piece for the newsletter, I was made aware of this book, which is called Light Break, and was published by his gallery, David's Werner Gallery, and it's a really beautifully printed book in the same spirit. And so I encourage you to track down a copy of this book, as well as, of course, finding a copy of Sweetflypaper of Life. There are like a million different editions of this, and it's kind of an essential book to have in your library. So, thanks so much. I'm not done with pictures and words, but maybe I'll take a little break for now. So, see you soon. Thanks so much.